In Cairo in 1980, the 60-year-old Mohammad Reza Pahlavi lay dying. His body was utterly exhausted. His strength diminished after battling terminal cancer for over 6 years. Despite his physical decline, he was the last scion of a dynasty that had endured for 2,500 years, an unbroken monarchy in Iran that had seen its rise and fall amidst the tumultuous currents of history. His death marked the end of an era, one that had once promised hope for Iran's future, yet ultimately succumbed to internal strife, external meddling, and the upheaval of revolutionary fervor. Mohammad Reza's regime, which had once seemed resilient, was crumbling amid protests, economic decline, and political unrest. Yet his rule had represented a complex chapter in Iran's history, an attempt to modernize and westernize a deeply traditional society while grappling with its own internal contradictions. His father, Reza Shah Pahlavi, had established the Pahlavi dynasty just a few decades earlier, enacting sweeping reforms that sought to elevate Iran's prestige on the global stage and improve the lives of its citizens. Under Reza Shah's leadership, Iran saw a dramatic rise in per capita income, tripling during his reign, and a leap in literacy rates from just 27% in 1967 to 80% by 1977. These reforms, while controversial, transformed Iran into a modern nation capable of asserting itself internationally. Nonetheless, the shadow of Reza Shah's autocratic style and his efforts to forge a unified national identity still loomed large over his son. Mohammad Reza inherited the tendencies of his father, his propensity for reform, which often provoked controversy, and his self-image as an infallible autocrat. He was also known for his vindictiveness, willing to order military suppression of protests and relying heavily on the secret police, Savak, to maintain his grip on power. The deposition of Mohammad Reza in 1979 sent shockwaves across the globe, effects that are still felt today in Iran's political landscape. To understand this complex and enigmatic nation, we must begin with its final Shah. The roots of Iran's modern history stretch back to the 19th century, when the country was under the rule of the Qajar dynasty, a Persianized Turkic dynasty, that took power in 1797 after a period of decline. The Qajars managed to reunite Persia, but their rule was marked by stagnation and decline relative to their powerful neighbors, the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire. Their efforts at military modernization were hesitant and often ineffective, such as the creation of the Cossack Brigade, composed of Russian officers, which symbolized the domination of Iran by foreign powers. This militarization attempt was a sign of Iran's subservience and vulnerability, and it played a role in the eventual downfall of the dynasty. Iran's territorial ambitions and sovereignty were continually compromised by imperial interests. The British and Russians coveted Iran's strategic position and resources, leading to repeated disputes and treaties that curtailed Iranian independence. By 1901, Iran had forfeited its oil rights to Britain, and by the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907, the country was carved into spheres of influence, effectively making Iran a pawn in the great game between the two imperial powers. The country was too weak to resist these incursions and thus remained nominally independent, a puppet regime serving the interests of foreigners. This period was characterized by a deep dissatisfaction among Iran's middle classes and religious authorities, especially the clerics and merchants who resented the foreign domination and the concessions that undermined Iranian sovereignty. This unrest culminated in the Persian Constitutional Revolution, a pivotal moment in Iran's history. The revolution was driven primarily by the middle and upper classes, those educated in the West, including military officers and politicians, who opposed the corrupt and weakened monarchy. Control of the state swung back and forth between the Khazars and the constitutionalists during a tumultuous 6-year period. The regime's reliance on Russian troops and foreign influence further alienated the populace, and the disunity among the factions, those advocating for secular reforms versus those seeking a more pious Islamic state, deepened Iran's internal divisions. Amid this chaos rose Reza Khan, born in 1878, who would eventually transform Iran's destiny. Growing up in a military household, Reza Khan joined the Cossack Brigade at age 16, gaining connections and promotions over the following decades. By the early 1920s, he was a brigadier general leading the influential Russian-trained force. His loyalty to foreign powers was initially advantageous, but he ultimately used this to his own benefit. In 1921, he staged a coup by marching into Tehran with the Cossack Brigade, effectively seizing power. 4 years later, he was appointed Chawaz Pahlavi by an Assembly of Parliament. His rule marked a decisive shift toward modernization, secularization of authority. Reza Shah's policies reflected a desire to forge a unified national identity, often at the expense of Iran's Islamic traditions. He ordered the closure of many Islamic madrasas and Christian missionary schools, and his royal decree prohibited women from wearing the traditional Islamic chador, an effort to secularize gender roles. Society was encouraged to view gender dynamics differently. Women were expected to be visible in public, and educational institutions were required to admit female students. These reforms were part of a broader project of state building that sought to modernize Iran along Western lines. Reza Shah also emphasized the importance of Iran's pre-Islamic history, notably asserting his authority by insisting his country be called Irana rather than a Persia, a move that bolstered Iranian nationalism but also conflated ethnic identities and justified forced assimilations. His policies aimed to homogenize the nation's diverse ethnic groups, often disregarding their unique identities in favor of a Persian-centric nationalism. His autocratic rule was characterized by a ruthless pursuit of modernization, sometimes brutal and often dismissive of opposition. His tenure ended abruptly in 1941 when the Allied powers occupied Iran, forcing him to abdicate and go into exile. He died in Johannesburg in 1944, leaving behind a legacy of rapid modernization amid growing internal dissent. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the son of Reza Shah, was born on October 26, 1919. From an early age, he was groomed for kingship, raised amidst material comfort and lofty expectations. His mother assured him that he was destined for greatness, and his twin sister recalled that he was always the center of her world. His relationship with his father was complex. While Reza Shah showered him with praise and confidence, he also maintained a strict, disciplined environment. At age 6, Mohammad Reza was officially named Crown Prince and was removed from his family's domestic life, sent to military schools designed to prepare him for leadership. His education was rigorous, and he often struggled with shyness, which perhaps endeared him to some, like Ernest Perron, the son of the school's gardener, who became his close confidant. During his studies abroad, specifically at the Lero Institute in Switzerland, Mohammad Reza experienced difficulties in adapting. Accounts differ on whether he physically fought to gain attention or was encouraged to stand up for himself, but his shy nature was evident. His friendship with Ernest Perron deepened, and upon returning to Iran in 1936, Mohammad Reza developed a fascination with Western culture, literature, and poetry. Their bond was so close that he brought Perron back to Iran, much to the disapproval of his father. Throughout his early life, Mohammad Reza admired the West, but he lacked his father's decisiveness and temper. The tensions between Iran and Europe worsened during World War II as Iran declared neutrality, but its strategic importance made it a prime target. The United Kingdom and the Soviet Union occupied Iran to secure their interests, an act that left the young crown prince under immense pressure. When Reza Shah was forced to abdicate in 1941, Mohammad Reza was crowned Shah at the age of 22. His early reign was marked by a failure to command respect on the international stage. He was often humiliated, notably during the Tehran Conference of 1943, where Stalin's insistence on security arrangements exposed Iran's vulnerability. Internally, dissent grew. There were multiple assassination attempts, and Mohammad Reza's authority was fragile. He was not inclined to respect the constitutional limits of his power, often dismissing the parliament and surrounding himself with yes men. Despite nominal constitutional provisions, his rule was increasingly autocratic. His political moves included the ousting and reinstatement of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, culminating in the 1953 coup orchestrated by the CIA and MI6, which removed Mossadegh after he nationalized Iran's oil. Mohammad Reza's return to power was marked by emotional relief and a sense of restored authority. Yet he was painfully aware of his fragile position, and he began to lay the groundwork for further reforms that would ultimately alter Iran's social fabric. In 1963, Mohammad Reza announced the White Revolution, a broad package of reforms intended to modernize Iran's society and economy. Land reform was central, redistributing land from aristocrats and landlords to peasant farmers, or at least trying to. The reforms aimed to weaken traditional power structures and promote industrial growth, literacy, and women's rights. Women gained suffrage and legal rights unprecedented in Iran's history, and efforts to improve literacy and education were intensified. The reforms initially boosted Iran's economy, with an impressive annual growth rate of nearly 10%, and improved the living standards for many Iranians. Yet, the land reforms were only marginally successful. Many landless families remained impoverished, and rural discontent simmered beneath the surface. Mohammad Reza's personal cult of personality grew during this period. He promoted himself as a messianic figure, aligning himself with Iran's ancient kings like Cyrus the Great. His celebration of 2,500 years of Persian monarchy in 1971 at Pahlavi's palace, featuring a parade of soldiers dressed as ancient warriors, was a spectacle of self-aggrandizement, but it also alienated many Iranians by emphasizing Iran's pre-Islamic past at a time of rising Islamic sentiment. His rule became increasingly disconnected from the realities of his people, especially as economic inequality widened and political dissent intensified. In the final years of his reign, Mohammad Reza's health deteriorated. On May 1, 1974, he first met with French Dr. Flandrin, who diagnosed him with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. The cancer was terminal, and he was to die within a few years. Yet, for several years he concealed his illness from the public. His health issues compounded his insecurity and paranoia. He became more erratic and delusional, bolstering a cult of personality that bordered on the messianic. His relationships with women, including his second wife, Sarah, whom he loved deeply but who was unable to bear children, further complicated his personal life. By 1978, the cracks in his regime became impossible to ignore. Anti-government protests grew in intensity, fueled by economic hardship, political repression, and religious opposition. The death of Ayatollah Khomeini's son and the controversial response to protests, such as the bloody Black Friday massacre of September 8, 1978, in Tehran, symbolized the regime's brutality and desperation. Mohammad Reza's refusal to compromise, combined with his increasing reliance on violence, made his rule appear increasingly illegitimate. He granted clemency to dissidents, including Khomeini, in a last-ditch effort to stabilize his regime, but these moves only emboldened opposition. By late 1978, it was clear that Mohammad Reza's hold on power was slipping away. Oil labor strikes crippled Iran's economy, and divisions within the military signaled that loyalty to the monarchy was waning. On January 16, 1979, he fled Iran, leaving behind a state on the brink of collapse. His departure marked the end of over 2 millennia of monarchy in Iran, replaced by the Islamic Republic that would soon take shape under Khomeini's leadership. The last remnants of the Pahlavi dynasty were swept aside swiftly and decisively in February 1979. Mohammad Reza sought refuge in several countries, including Egypt, where he received asylum. Despite his exile, he remained a controversial figure, both a symbol of Iran's imperial past and a reminder of its failed modernization efforts. He spent his final months in Cairo, seeking end-of-life care and treatment for his cancer. On July 27, 1980, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi died in exile. His death marked the definitive end of an era, a dynasty that had once sought to modernize Iran, but was ultimately consumed by the very forces of change it tried to control.